Good evening, I'm Anthony Robart. This is Crime Beat.
Tonight, an explosive revelation in an unsolved cold case we first featured in Season 1.
On Friday, October 9th, 2020, we positively confirmed the identification of the person responsible for the DNA sample found on Christine's underwear.
Answers for a family that had almost given up hope after 36 years of waiting to find out.
I think you just call it hope. You dreamed it might happen.
Yeah, like anything in this case, it couldn't be a simple answer. It had to be someone we knew well.
Here is Eric Sorensen with the final chapter of the Christine Jessop and Paul Morin tragedy.
They were next-door neighbors. She was almost 10, he was 24. Christine Jessop and Paul Morin, their names forever thrust together by a tragedy neither was responsible for. Today, it is a busy suburb north of Toronto, Canada's largest city. But in 1984, Queensville was a sleepy little town of 400 residents. Serious crime was unheard of, and freckle-faced Christine Jessop had dreams like any 9-year-old girl.
She always wanted to be a veterinarian. She loved animals. And she had her little dog, Freckles, the beagle. And she was just a normal little child.
On that fateful day in October 1984, Christine took the bus to school as always.
I saw her off to school. She was happy-go-lucky, away she went in the bus. She was a very quiet little girl, very vivacious, stuck to home, very homey type.
After school, Christine made plans with a girlfriend to meet in a park, but Christine didn't show up. She took the school bus home and dropped off her bag, and was never heard from again. At first, her mom, Janet Jessop, wasn't worried.
I called all her friends to see if she'd gone with them. It wasn't just sort of call the police right away. No, we looked everywhere.
When evening came and no Christine, the dread that every parent fears, Janet began to live for real.
There's something in the back of your mind, you know, when you can't find them right away. Something's not right. And then finally I thought, well, I think we better call the police.
Several hundred volunteers and police scoured a 30-square-mile area near Newmarket, north of Toronto.
The search was massive. The whole town came out to help.
You could see them searching across the fields, for miles. They searched different areas. We went out and searched. That went on for 3 months.
Okay, everybody start forward, please. Very slowly, and don't leave any gaps.
The search turned up nothing. It was agonizing for Christine's father, Robert.
I sincerely hope that whoever has her, just don't harm Christine. Let us know that she's safe. For God's sakes, let her know that she's safe.
As days turned to weeks, Janet Jessop never gave up hope. And right through Christmas, she received cards of encouragement.
Every day I wish this would be the day your little girl would be returned to you. Don't stop praying. I won't. This is from a person who lives in Etobicoke, dated November the 28th, and we do not know at all.
We've tried to treat today as just another day in our lives, and I think if we had put a Christmas tree up and had presents and so on, it would have, to my way of thinking, probably would have had no meaning at all. If the person involved has any feelings at all, that this would be a natural day for them to get in touch with us somehow and let us know one way or the other.
But on New Year's Eve came the awful news. A body had been found in a field 50 kilometers away. It was Christine's.
As soon as we saw our minister and the police walk up the driveway, we knew.
Her little girl had been raped and stabbed multiple times. On a bitter January day, Janet Jessop was left to make sense of the reality that her only daughter was gone.
Really, basically, love them while you have them. Because I think this is one instance that proves you never know what's coming tomorrow.
The funeral for Christine Jessop was unimaginably sad for Janet and Robert Jessop and Christine's brother Ken. The church could barely hold the 250 mourners who came. Many were children, friends of Christine. The Jessops said the public service was their way to thank the community that had been so supportive. Reverend Beverly Hall said Christine's death cried out for justice.
We bring with us today our sorrow. We bring with us our fearfulness. And especially, we bring our anger and our outrage that such a terrible thing could happen to a delightful, innocent young child.
Christine's body was laid to rest in the cemetery that was adjacent to the Jessop home. The search for the victim was over. Now, to find the killer. And from that moment on, the investigation would spiral into not one, but two tragedies.
Coming up on Crime Beat. Investigators hone in on one man, a supposedly weird type of guy living next door. Tonight on Crime Beat, it's 1984, and the family of 9-year-old Christine Jessop is devastated. 3 months after their daughter went missing, her body is discovered in a field just outside of town. All investigators know is that Christine was supposed to meet up with a friend after school, but never showed up. Now back to Eric Sorensen with the final chapter of the Christine Jessop and Paul Morin tragedy.
In October 1984, Paul Morin worked at a plant sanding furniture. He lived with his parents next door to the Jessop family. But the Morins kept to themselves, even during the search for their missing young neighbor. The death of Christine was sad news, but little did Paul realize then what it would mean for him down the road. For weeks after Christine's body was found, police were getting nowhere. In February, they visited Janet Jessop, who told investigators about her neighbor, Paul. He was described as a weird type guy. In fact, he played clarinet, did beekeeping, and didn't interact much with the Jessops, including Christine. But for Durham Regional Police Detectives John Shephard and Bernie Fitzpatrick, a weird type guy represented a potential breakthrough. Morin's lawyer, renowned defense counsel Clayton Ruby, suggested the investigators were under pressure to find Christine's killer.
It's nothing new. Police get closed minds very early in a case, particularly when it's a case that they'll be criticized for not solving.
Police interviewed Morin, and by having an officer pose as a student hairstylist at Morin's band practice, were able to gather a hair sample from him. A forensic specialist compared his hair with one found in the necklace on Christine's body and deemed the hairs microscopically similar. Police zeroed in.
The term for this now is tunnel vision. They make up their mind, they see nothing else, and they make the facts fit. And they curtail their investigation because there's no point. They know who's guilty.
A cold case investigator says police wanted the case solved.
Utilizing the flawed science and that in conjunction with the identification of a person of interest at the time, they kind of had some tunnel vision in that they believed that they were after the right person and their attention was focused on that person because, to be clear, everyone wanted this case solved and with the right person in custody.
Police searched Morin's car and found fibers also deemed similar to fibers from Christine's clothes. They had the FBI construct a profile of the killer.
The FBI is confident that the killer is from Queensville. Police say the U.S. agency has been amazingly accurate in its profiles, especially when the crime has been a violent one.
The profile concluded Christine and the killer knew each other, that he was local, he was white, and it even narrowed down his age.
According to the FBI's Behavioral Sciences Unit in Virginia, Christine's killer is between 19 and 26 years old.
Guy Paul Morin happened to be 24. But could it have been someone else? Someone else who was local and who knew Christine, who was also white and in his 20s? If so, that consideration was discarded. It was a critical turning point in the entire case. Investigators said they had several suspects, but the profile of a prime suspect was taking shape.
His initial intentions were not to kill Christine, but after sexually assaulting her and not getting the reaction he expected, he lost control of himself and murdered her.
5 days later, detectives Shephard and Fitzpatrick arrested Guy Paul Morin and brought him in. Morin was stunned, but the detectives believed they had their man.
Detectives made the arrest last night. 25-year-old Guy Paul Morin, who lived next door to the Jessop family, was arrested while on his way to Stouffville for a band practice.
The police who investigated this had almost no experience in homicide cases. It was a complicated case scientifically, forensically, and they just were totally ill-prepared for it. As weeks and months go by in a highly publicized investigation, especially where there's a child murder, the pressure is immense. And this was on the doorstep of Toronto, so the media were very, very well aware of this case and following it. And I think they also felt a great deal of pressure internally within their force and from the family. And we ended up with what you see classically in wrongful convictions, tunnel vision.
For example, police were suspicious when they learned that Morin had not attended Christine's funeral. Had he gone, investigators were there, photographing everyone, because police also tend to be suspicious that killers often do attend funerals of their victims.
So no matter what he'd done, if he'd gone, it would have looked like he was the killer going to look at what he'd achieved. If he doesn't go, he looks like the killer who's afraid to be there, knowing there will be police and that he'll be on display. As Morin would tell you, anything you do will be seen as a sign of guilt once they've decided you're the guy.
A sign of guilt or not, police now had a suspect in custody, and the town of Queensville could breathe a sigh of relief.
I think everybody more or less felt that they didn't know if it was safe for their children to be out on the street.
I think people are quite relieved on the whole that the arrest has been made.
Relief for police, too, who acknowledged the pressure they had been under.
Probably one of the most emotional investigations our force has been involved in. It was an extremely long, drawn-out investigation that was taxing upon our reserves and taxing upon our men.
Guy Paul Morin was put on trial. The evidence was brought against him: the hair, the fibers, forensic expertise. A timeline was constructed that gave Morin the opportunity to grab Christine and take her away before her mother and brother got home at 4:30 that afternoon. And while being held, there was an alleged confession given by Morin to a fellow inmate. News reports quoted Robert Dean May.
May reported that Morin suddenly burst into tears, crying, "Oh, why did I do it? I did it. I killed the little girl."
Another jail cell companion was this undercover police officer who testified that Morin claimed, quote, to red rum the innocent, that's my cure. Red rum is murder backwards. Crown Prosecutor John Scott put that sensational testimony before the jury and directly to Guy Paul Morin.
Then in front of the hushed courtroom, Scott approached the witness stand and whispered, "You took her for a ride to her death. You red-rummed an innocent, Christine Jessop. Isn't that correct?" Morin answered calmly, "No, I didn't."
Red rum and other odd statements by Morin prompted his lawyer to do something remarkable in his defense. Clayton Ruby called psychiatric evidence that his own client was schizophrenic, seriously mentally ill. Ruby argued that his client was not guilty, but essentially told the jury that if you find he committed the crime, then he's still not guilty by reason of insanity. It was an audacious legal maneuver and, his lawyer admitted, a risky tactic.
I think it was a great risk. I can't know how the jury arrived at their verdict, but by offering it, I think you endanger the not guilty plea. The jury may take that as evidence that if he's crazy, he must have done it. Now, obviously, this jury didn't do that.
The jury, in fact, cleared Guy Paul Morin, a verdict that left the courtroom stunned, but not the man now acquitted.
Very, very happy for the verdict that has come out from the jury.
Morin did have an odd way of expressing himself.
I still had that feeling of positive. When you do something that is not wrong, if you do not do anything of wrong, then there's no reason for you to be convicted.
When you heard not guilty, what went through your mind?
As is happiness.
Morin would later say his one regret was allowing his legal team to introduce evidence that he was schizophrenic. Decades on, Clayton Ruby adamantly defended that decision.
He felt that it painted him in a way that just wasn't really accurate. Does that cause you to have some regret at all in this?
No, I made a tactical decision, which was the jury needs to understand why he is so strange. And I have an explanation that is different than he's a murderer. And I think that worked.
It worked, but it left police and others with a lingering sense that Morin, in psychiatric terms, was capable of committing the crime. For the Jessop family, the verdict was crushing.
We're pretty mixed up.
You look outside and you get damn mad is what you get, because you feel that the system has let you down. And you feel frustration, anger.
For weeks, the public had been primed with stories of forensic evidence and late-night confessions, so the acquittal shocked almost everyone.
People are right back to where they were before they found this guy.
Since he's innocent, that means there still must be someone out there.
But police held to the belief that that someone out there was Paul Morin. Indeed, for prosecutors, the psychiatric evidence of serious mental illness presented by his own defense only fortified the belief he was guilty.
Their focus was on who they believed was the offender at the time. I did this work for a long time, and you don't go into this guessing or making a haphazard decision on it. You go into it, and if you're making an arrest, you are, in your mind, certain that you have the right person.
The prosecutors and the Jessops remain convinced Morin committed the crime.
If we're denied the chance of a new trial, in our estimation, it basically means that our daughter died for nothing, and the case will go unsolved.
Life was all but unbearable for the Jessops. Behind their home, the cemetery where Christine was buried, and right next door, over their shoulders, the home of the man they were still convinced killed their daughter.
Our daughter is buried perhaps 100 yards to the west of us in the cemetery behind our home. So that the constant reminder of Christine being there and the accused here.
The Crown appealed the verdict, and Ontario's highest court found fault in the trial judge's instructions to the jury on reasonable doubt. A new trial was ordered, a decision affirmed by the Supreme Court of Canada. The original detectives were fully prepared to put Morin in custody one more time.
Mr. Morin will be arrested. He'll be taken back to Oshawa, where he will be processed by us and then lodged in the nearest county jail.
It was reported that Paul was close to tears when told he would have to face trial again.
He does not intend to ask that his plea be changed. The plea again will be not guilty.
A new trial. For the parents of Christine Jessop, a second chance in their eyes to see justice done.
We were victims by chance, but we're survivors by choice.
I honestly would go through hell and brimstone to see an end to this.
Coming up on Crime Beat, cracks in the case will start to emerge. Paul Morin has already gone to trial once for the murder of 9-year-old Christine Jessop and was acquitted. After the Crown appealed the acquittal, a second trial was granted. And investigators remain adamant they have the right man. Now back to Eric Sorensen with the final chapter of the Christine Jessop and Paul Morin tragedy.
For us, I think for victims, it's hard living day to day.
For Janet Jessop and her family, a second trial meant a second opportunity for a new jury to get a conviction for the brutal slaying of 9-year-old Christine. Prosecutors brought forward much of the same evidence, but 6 years after the first trial, the second would be clouded by new questions. Kirk Macon authored the book Red Rum the Innocent about this long and complicated case. The more he looked, the more he sensed Guy Paul Morin was the wrong suspect.
He struck me more and more as time went on as a genuinely innocent guy. The trial went for almost 9 months. It went into everything you could possibly go into in microscopic detail. And at the end of it, I still felt he is not the guy.
Cracks in the evidence emerged. First, the timeline, the day Christine was taken. Police determined Morin punched the clock at work and couldn't have got home to abduct the little girl till about 4:15 p.m. But Janet and Ken Jessop at first said they were home by 4:10. Police told the Jessops they could have got their time wrong. And when Janet testified, she had changed her mind and said she and her son got home after 4:30, leaving time for Morin to commit the crime in the eyes of police. Years later, Ken Jessop said he was just a kid being told by police he'd set his watch improperly.
It automatically starts throwing doubt into your own statements that you've already given because you're 14 years old and you're being told by police that you're mistaken. It wasn't even a person anymore, a devil, demon that the police had built him up to be, that had killed your sister.
The jailhouse informants were back for the second trial to testify once more that Morin confessed to the crime. But Robert Dean May was deemed by defense experts during the trial as a pathological liar. Questioned years later, May initially stood by what he said he'd heard from Morin.
He was tearful and voiced to me that he had killed Christine Jessop.
But when pressed a little harder,
I can't be sure what I heard anymore, but I do believe that that was what I heard.
May ultimately conceded he was trying to cut a deal with police.
What did you hope to get? I was hoping to have my sentence reduced.
May's testimony and that of the other jailed informant, Mr. X, was dubious, but police relied on it anyway. Another problem for the Crown? The officer overseeing the original crime scene had kept 2 sets of notebooks and was charged with perjury and obstruction of justice after Morin's first trial, although those charges were stayed. And a forensic specialist for the defense said the hair found on Christine was not at all a conclusive match with Morin's hair.
This famous hair, which supposedly had linked him to Christine, that there were 2 or 3 people out of 30 in her class which had a similar biologically constructed hair. And there were those kind of frailties in basically everything.
There were a lot of people who were well-meaning at various points along the way, but it was highly dysfunctional, it was botched, it was the product of a massive amount of publicity and pressure on police, which compelled them to do things they had no idea how to do.
And yet this time, the jury found Morin guilty. Taken aback, Guy Paul blurted out in court, "I am not guilty of this crime." His then fiance, who'd walked to and from court with Guy Paul day after day, now found herself alone after the verdict.
This has been a travesty of justice. He should be free. He's an innocent man.
His lawyer, Jack Pinkofsky, was truly shaken.
Today, an innocent man was found guilty. We intend to appeal this verdict and restore the innocence of a person who had absolutely nothing to do with the abduction or killing of Christine Jessop.
But for the Jessops, at long last, satisfaction that the man who'd lived next door, the man they were certain was guilty, would be going to prison.
Finally, somebody has paid for Christine. The guilty one has paid for Christine's murder.
The only consolation of the whole affair is that it's finally put to rest. And maybe Christine can rest in peace.
Maybe, but there were growing doubts about this verdict, and with that, a niggling question. If not Guy Paul Morin, then who? Still, that was not a question this day on the minds of prosecutors.
Might just go and have a beer.
If there was a sense of smug satisfaction for police and prosecutors, it wouldn't last.
After the break, the explosive revelation that changes everything. Welcome back to Crime Beat. A second jury has found Guy Paul Morin guilty in the 1984 killing of Christine Jessop. For the first time, Christine's family finally feels they have justice. But real justice is still to come. Now back to Eric Sorensen with the final chapter of the Christine Jessop and Guy Paul Morin tragedy.
2 trials, 2 outcomes. I was in the courtroom for Morin's first trial, not guilty. Kirk Macon was there for the second, guilty. The public was shocked both times. A decade-long legal saga in which the court of law and the court of public opinion never seemed to be on the same page.
If there had not been the public uproar that there was, the clamor after he was convicted, it would have been a very long time before he'd seen the light of day.
The defense was convinced someone else murdered Christine and prepared to appeal Morin's conviction.
I'm confident that by the end of all of this, we'll know what went wrong and we'll know how to stop it going wrong like this again.
But before another legal battle could start, an extraordinary investigative tool that wasn't even available when Guy Paul Morin was first arrested settled matters once and for all. DNA. A semen stain in Christine's clothes was found to have the genetic fingerprint of the killer, and it was not Guy Paul Morin.
It's wonderful. It's about time.
Suddenly, Morin was a free man.
I know, I didn't do it. I did not kill Christine Jessop. It's as simple as that, and finally, as I said, DNA has exonerated me 100%.
And now it was Morin's family that felt the weight of injustice lifted.
Did you always know this day would come?
Oh yes, I was certain of that. I know my son.
And I'm happy the way things have turned out.
What are you going to do now, today?
I think it's time to celebrate.
For the Jessops, it was devastating news. Again, 10 years of certainty about who killed Christine vanished in a flash of modern forensic science.
We're back 10 years. It's December 31st, 1984. You know, Christine is still dead, and there is still no person no longer accused.
From the prosecutor, who had planned to have a beer after Morin's conviction, came a contrite admission.
The justice system in this country is run by human beings. Therefore, it is not infallible. It does, on the rarest of occasions, make mistakes. This was one of them.
But was it enough to just call it a mistake? Alphonse Morin believed the truth was disregarded.
After 10 years, it's hard to put that in.
Well, after 10 years, it is hard to put it into words for the simple reason that they never did believe us. You know, and how often do you have to say the truth? I mean, the truth was never enough for them.
How are you? Very good.
A major public inquiry was called to determine why the wrong suspect was convicted.
Please be seated.
Mr. Justice Fred Kaufman would hear testimony from 120 witnesses.
How and why did the administration of justice fail in this instance, and how can such a failure be prevented in future?
The original investigators were taken to task for seizing on Guy Paul Morin so quickly, never wavering in the face of flawed evidence. Some officials eventually expressed regret.
I am not proud of having been involved in the prosecution of someone who is innocent.
A major conclusion that police and prosecutors engaged in tunnel vision, too focused on Morin, not enough on other suspects.
Thank you very much.
The police force that had pursued him relentlessly apologized unreservedly.
Today we extend to Mr. Morin and his family a full, unequivocal,
and unconditional apology for our mistakes which led to his wrongful conviction.
But where did this leave the Jessops? The inquiry did nothing to answer the only question that really mattered to them: who killed Christine? The trail of the killer only getting colder year by year.
We still have this hanging over our heads 14 years later, and it doesn't get any easier.
Decades passed. Janet, who was in her 30s when Christine was taken, would be in her 70s, still waiting for justice.
You can't fathom it. You can't unless you've gone through it. There's just no way you can understand your feelings. Where's he? That's the question I have. I want to find him. Him, her, it, whomever. And that's my goal.
A goal that was destined, it seemed, never to be reached. And then?
Breaking news this Thursday night, a major break in a decades-old cold case. The man who murdered a Toronto girl in 1984.
After 36 years and 5 days, the news came like a lightning bolt.
On Friday, October 9th, 2020, we positively confirmed the identification of the person responsible for the DNA sample found on Christine's underwear. Calvin Hoover of Toronto, Ontario, was 28 years old in 1984. He was known to the Jessop family at the time of Christine's disappearance. He died in 2015. However, if he were alive today, the Toronto Police Service would arrest Calvin Hoover for the murder of Christine Jessop.
Calvin Hoover, a friend of the Jessop family. His wife worked with Christine's father, Robert, who was incarcerated at the time. When Christine got home from school on that fateful day, Hoover likely knew the rest of the family was out of the house, according to Ken Jessop. Hoover's name came as a shock, but in an instant it all made sense to Ken when reached by phone just after the police announcement.
I, from day one, truly believed it was someone that knew our family, knew my dad was in jail, and knew that we were going to visit him that day. And it all fits together now.
Hoover was not viewed as a suspect by police or by the Jessops. He eventually moved away from Queensville. Calvin Hoover died in 2015 by suicide.
There's nothing I can say today that can reverse the tragic events of 36 years ago. There are no winners in this announcement, and this is not a reason to celebrate. It does, however, allow us to take a major step forward in our efforts to bring justice to Christine's family.
How was the case cracked? DNA, once again. This time genetic genealogy, an investigative technique similar to ancestry websites.
Simply put, it is not a DNA match. What it is it provides a potential, and I must stress a potential, family lineage from a DNA sample. Then it is up to a police investigator to build from that potential family lineage by conducting interviews, by going through historical records, by combing through numerous documents. And in doing so, in essence, builds out a family tree. I can tell you that, and from that family tree, then persons of interest may be identified. The name Calvin Hoover is one of the names that came up in two specific families that we saw built out. The name Calvin Hoover, upon review of the investigative file, is a name that we know had a connection to the Jessop family.
It was the Toronto Police Cold Case Unit that had kept the Jessop file alive. Until last year, Stacey Gallant headed the unit, believing DNA could still make the difference. He spoke of it months before the breakthrough.
We're talking about a lot of time that's gone by, but the evidence is still the same. The DNA is that of the offender, and that means utilizing some of the sites that people would go on to identify their ancestry and try and determine their family lines. If we're lucky and somebody on the family line has their DNA and their profile on one of these sites, we could get lucky and follow that family line and identify who the person responsible is, alive or dead.
And when the news broke, he recalled the U.S. genealogy sites that he had sought out.
I thought, you know what, there might be something there. You know, this might be one that I hold out hope for, that we get a good result on.
And they did. Calvin Hoover was not a suspect. it was the genealogy tracing that Gallant's former cold case unit carried out that paid off.
I felt satisfied. It's not jumping up and down and happy, it's just satisfied that we were able to produce this result. It's a proven method now that can help clear some of these cases.
Through the years, Gallant spoke to Janet Jessop to assure her Christine's case was not forgotten. And the memory of Christine, it seems, never stopped flickering in the minds of the public.
I would always get tips coming in on that case. There wasn't a long period of time that went by in my time in the cold case unit that there was a lack of tips coming in on the Jessop case. So that means that society as a whole never forgot this case all these years.
Coming up, Christine's family grapples with the truth. "36 years after Christine Jessop's disappearance, her killer is identified as Calvin Hoover. But investigators are too late for an arrest. We return now to Eric Sorensen with the conclusion of the final chapter of the Christine Jessop and Paul Morin tragedy.
Eric, you first covered Christine Jessop's case when she disappeared more than 30 years ago. Now police have identified her killer, but he's dead. So it's an ending, but is it justice?
Well, it's justice a long time in coming, but it is still justice to finally solve a crime. I mean, that is the ultimate goal whenever there's a tragedy like this. Can there ever really be justice for a mother whose daughter is murdered? Is it justice for a brother who waits almost his entire life for an answer? After 36 years, there's some solace perhaps, but a feeling of justice? Not really.
I think you just call it hope. You dreamed it might happen.
Yeah. Relieved that we finally have the answer we waited for. Angry about who it is. Frustrated. Upset.
After so many years, Janet Jessop and her son Ken had about given up on finding Christine's killer. And to learn it was Calvin Hoover was one more painful revelation. They'd never imagined it could be a friend of the family.
Nope, this came out of the blue. I remembered his face when they showed the mugshot.
Kenneth and I really didn't know him that well.
We knew his wife.
We knew Heather better. Well, women know women better, you know, and the kids. And they'd come up and play because we had the space.
They babysat us. Their kids were left with us.
Yeah, we had some good times together, and it's just...
It's heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking.
Christine's family is grateful to Toronto police for keeping the case alive, though the news would have been easier to take if the killer had just been a total stranger.
Like anything in this case, it couldn't be a simple answer. It couldn't be something just to put a final lid on it. It had to be someone we knew well.
It turns out the original investigators were right about some things. It was someone local who knew Christine. It just wasn't Paul Morin.
I've always questioned why?
The why of this case and Morin's unjust time spent in prison was crucial in sparking a movement in Canada to confront wrongful convictions. It forced the public to acknowledge that the Canadian justice system does make mistakes. Morin accepted that the police didn't target him intentionally.
Everything he did or had done became suspicious and confirmatory of their theory that he was the one who committed the crime. And it became a house built of sand. But our trouble was, it took many, many years for it to be seen that that's what it really was.
Few cases have had a greater impact on policing and the justice system than the relentless legal pursuit of the unassuming beekeeper from Queensville, Ontario, Paul Morin. After his ordeal, new measures were brought in to prevent the misuse of forensic evidence.
The use of what we call junk science in the business is far less likely these days. It still exists, it's still used, but we're much more alert to it.
Legal advocate James Lockyer says it is also now rare that prosecutors rely on jailhouse informants. And police have learned to put maximum resources and more than 2 investigators right away onto a major case.
front-end loading of an investigation now is one of the forefronts of how homicides are investigated. You put a lot of investigators on it in the beginning, right from the start, and gather as much of the evidence as you possibly can in that short time period following the incident.
And police are better trained today to resist tunnel vision that settles on one suspect too quickly.
When all the investigative efforts were focused on one person, it allowed the person that was responsible to get further and further away from the investigation over time.
But perhaps the biggest change of all for Canadian justice was the genesis of a movement to address wrongful convictions.
It was a seminal day, the day of his conviction, July 30th, 1992, is a day I'll always remember.
On that day, James Lockyer was asked to take up Paul Morin's appeal, and a committee to advocate for Morin would become a national organization.
We then formed the Association Defence of the Wrongly Convicted, now Innocence Canada is what it's called.
Morin's case was not the first unjust verdict overturned. In the 1980s, Donald Marshall suffered a terrible injustice. He had spent 11 years in prison for a murder in Nova Scotia that he didn't commit. Then David Milgaard was freed after 23 years in prison for a murder he had not committed in Saskatchewan. And then came Paul Morin. 18 months in prison and 10 years living with the stigma of murdering a child. In each case, there was evidence police and prosecutors blundered and focused too narrowly on one suspect, the wrong suspect.
And coincidentally, all their names began with an M, and they became known as the 3 M's of the Canadian justice system and its failings.
The public had come to recognize that the justice system can make big mistakes. And a quarter century after Morin's acquittal, legislators have recognized it too.
The present Liberal government has announced that it's going to set up an independent review tribunal to review claims of wrongful conviction, something that we've been advocating for since 1993.
Former journalist and author Kirk Macon is now the co-president of Innocence Canada.
These cases, there are many of them still out there. It's going to be a long time before we can right the wrong, and there will be many more. The ingredients are always there for wrongful convictions.
At the end of the day, God bless the science that showed that if there's one person in the world who hadn't committed the crime, it was Paul.
That maybe the intention wasn't there, but the blunders sure were.
This was one of Paul Morin's last public appearances. He would go on to get married and had 2 sons. When police identified Christine's killer a quarter century after his name was cleared, Morin issued a statement. I am relieved for Christine's mother, Janet, and her family, and hope this will give them some peace of mind. When DNA exonerated me in January 1995, I was sure that one day DNA would reveal the real killer, and now it has. Ken Jessop, himself the subject of rumors in the case, says he's relieved for Morin.
I'm glad Paul's finally free of whispers and suspicion.
But it's difficult to let go of his frustration with the original investigators who mishandled evidence and didn't own up to it for years.
They knew that before the first trial. There was a memo found at the inquiry. They knew that. If they just had have admitted that back then, we wouldn't have gone through this, and maybe they would have caught Hoover alive.
It's what makes this story so sad. A mother, a father, and a brother not only lost Christine, they were led down a tortuous path of false leads and dashed hopes. What got Janet and her son through all these years? Each other.
She's been my pillar of strength through all this.
And you've been mine.
Yep.
Yeah.
There is some comfort in simply knowing.
It's done. It's finally over.
They can set aside now how Christine died and embrace the memories of how she lived.
Always happy.
Yeah. She had never a worry in the world. Well, they don't.
She wouldn't harm a fly.
I mean, she had a chance to live, and she should have had that chance. All little girls and boys should. But you still say, why? That's my big question. But you'll never know. Why anybody?
Finally, answers for Christine Jessop's family, and new hope for the families in other unsolved cases, hoping that their day will come too. I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat.
Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to my Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts.